Hello, Michael. The question we have for today is why would you say that the weakest means of purifying the mind is self-attention if in an immature student or aspirant, their capacity for self-attention is less intense than any other bridging practice that leads to an easier practice of self-attention?
This is the quickest means in the sense that it's the most effective means. A little effort made in being self-attentive will be far more effective in purifying the mind than a lot of effort made in other paths. The reason for that is all other practices, to a greater or lesser extent, they're indulging our inclination to attend to things other than ourselves, and or they're indulging our inclination to look for solutions outside ourselves. That is, all other paths, our attention is on something other than ourselves. So what the solution to all our problems, as is made clear by Bhagavan, lies only within ourselves. Only by knowing ourselves as we actually are can we eradicate this ego, and only by eradicating ego can we get rid of all our problems. So all that is the impurities in the mind are our Vishaya vasanas. Vishaya vasanas Vishaya means phenomenon. Anything other than ourselves is a Vishaya. So anything other than that fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am, is a Vishaya. So, and vasana means an inclination. So Vishaya vasana is an inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves. Since all other practices entail attending to something other than ourselves, as I say, they're indulging our inclination to continue attending to other things. That doesn't mean that other paths cannot purify the mind to some extent. For example, other than self-investigation, probably the best means to purify the mind is by the path of bhakti. That is, the path that is the path of bhakti. But here I'm referring to the preliminary stages of the path of bhakti, when you take God to be something other than yourself. The path of vichara. This is the true path of bhakti, or it's the highest stage of the path of bhakti, because then we are recognizing that God is not something other than ourselves. God is what is shining in this eye. Therefore, we attend only to I. But for those who are still at the stage of Anyabhava, taking God to be something other than themselves, they are trying to cultivate love for God. For example, if you're meditating on God, if you're meditating on a name or form of God, you will often find your mind will be distracted by other thoughts. So you will think, why is my mind distracted by those other thoughts? Because I'm more interested in those things than God, in thinking about God. So that means my love for God is not sufficient. So we try to focus more and more on this thought of God, or in name and form of God. So by doing so, we slowly wean the mind off its inclination to think about other things. So as our love for God increases, our interest in other things decreases. So the mind is definitely purified in that way, but still God seems to us to be something other than ourselves. What will happen is when our mind reaches a certain stage of maturity, then we will clearly recognize, how can God be something other than myself? God is the infinite whole. So who am I to say I am something separate from God? So who is this I who claims to be separate from God? Then we recognize that God cannot be anything other than myself, and I cannot be anything other than God. So why should I? It's only by my rising as ego and taking this person to be myself that I seem to be something other than God. So in this way, the Anyabhava, the attitude that God is something other than oneself, turns into an Anyabhava, the attitude that God is exists in us as I. This is what Bhagavan refers to in verse 8 of Upadēśa Undiyār. Anya bhavatin avanaham ananya bhavamai undipara anatinam uttamam undipara. That means rather than anya bhava, that's rather than meditating on God as if he's something other than oneself, ananya bhava, but ananya bhava means meditating on him as not other than oneself, and he adds there, avanaham ahum ananya bhavam. That is the ananya bhava in which he is I. So when we understand that God is not something other than ourselves, God is that which is shining in us as I, what do? We then, instead of meditating on something other than ourselves, we meditate on ourselves alone. And that's what ananya bhava means, meditation on what is not other. God is not other than ourselves, so we attend only to ourselves. And Bhagavan then says, rather than the anya bhava, this ananya bhava, of all, anatinam uttamam, it is the best of all. So among all the means to purify the mind, among all the practices of bhakti, among all the different forms of meditation, this meditation on ourselves alone, this is the best. What does he mean by the best in that context? That the whole string of verses from verse 3 to verse 8, they're all about purifying the mind. So Bhagavan clearly said that of all, this is the best of all means to purify the mind. Why? Because so long as you're still taking God to be other than yourself, you're still indulging that inclination to attend to something other than yourself. You're still taking God to be a vishaya, an object. God, it cannot be an object. God is the subject. So that is not to put down. That is that anya bhava, that is second to this path of vichara taught by Bhagavan. This is the best thing. And it's appropriate. That is, so long as our mind goes outwards, it's good to have that attitude of devotion to God. That is, so long as our mind goes outwards, we seem to be this little person, so God seems to be other than ourselves. No wrong with that. But so the anya bhava is not opposed to the ananya bhava. It sits very comfortably alongside, as we can see in Bhagavan's Arunachala Stuti Panchakam. In Arunachala Stuti Panchakam, that is, Bhagavan is clearly praising the hill, something other, their name and form, something that seems to be other than ourselves. He's clearly praising that name and form, but at the same time, you can see the ananya bhava in so many ways. So, what is Arunachala? Arunachala appears outside in the form of a hill, but it's actually that which is shining in our heart as I. He says very, very clearly in Arunachala Stuti Panchakam. So the two are not contradictory. That is, the anya bhava can be a great support to the ananya bhava. That is, so long as our mind is going outwards, it's appropriate to cling to God in name and form. But to really know God, we need to turn within, because what God actually is not just the external name and form. God is that which is shining in us as I. So this is it's a good way of purifying the mind, but it cannot be as effective as attending to ourselves, because God, we're still allowing our mind we're still satisfying that inclination of the mind to go outwards towards something other than ourselves. Whereas in self-attentiveness, we are directly opposing that inclination to go outwards. So this has to be the most effective means to purify the mind. There are other means. For those who are not attracted to this path of bhakti, the other means are various types of meditation, yoga, pranayama, different meditation techniques and everything. This is suitable for people who have a strong sense of doership, who feel, I want to do something. What can I do to get this? And also for people who are looking for experiences. That yoga offers lots of experiences. Bhagavan's path doesn't offer any experiences, because Bhagavan doesn't ask us to take interest in experiences. Bhagavan asks us to investigate who is the experiencer. That is, we are looking for the reality of the experiencer, not for any. So well, experiences may come and go on the path, but we shouldn't take interest in experience. Whereas in yoga, they take a lot of interest in experience. Right? That is, if you do this and this, you get such and such an experience. So that path it's suitable for people at a certain stage of spiritual development. People who are still interested in having wonderful experiences, people who are still want to be doing something. What can I do? Yes, okay, you do your pranayama, you do your meditation. So that will also that can also purify the mind in a roundabout way. The main thing from these sort of practices of yoga is the mind gains a certain ability to focus on one thing. But having gained that ability to focus on one thing, what does Bhagavan say in verse 14 of Upadēśa Undiyār? That is the mind which will subside by pranayama. Instead of allowing it to subside in laya, it should be sent on the orvari. Orvari is a very nice term Bhagavan used in Tamil. Or is a verb that means to know or to investigate. So one meaning of orvari is orambari, the investigating path. In other words, the path of self-investigation. Another meaning of or, it's that is in Tamil, oru means one. Or is, when oru comes before a vowel, it becomes or. In this case, there isn't a vowel, but in poetry, you can use or to mean one, even before a consonant. So it can also mean the one path. But what is the one path? The one path for Bhagavan is this path of investigation. So whichever way we take it, it means the same. He's referring to the path of self-investigation. So once the mind has the ability to curb the outward going inclination, before it subsides into laya, if you then direct it on the path of self-investigation, you'll bring about the destruction of the mind. So yoga can also be a means to come into this path, but it's less effective. As a means of purifying the mind, it's less effective than bhakti. Bhakti is the best means. And the highest form of bhakti is self-investigation. So of all this is the best. As Bhagavan says in verse 8, and 18 ultimum. Of all means to purify the mind, the most effective is self-investigation. Because it's the most effective, it's also the quickest. So the little effort we make to attend to ourselves is worth 1,000 times more effort made to attend to other things. So this is definitely the best. Even if that is, the question says, if in an immature student or aspirant, their capacity for self-attention is less and less intense, is less or less intense than any other bridging practice, but leads to an easier practice of self-attention. That is, if people really have no interest in self-attention at all, no inclination even to try to be self-attentive, then it's good to prescribe the path of dualistic devotion. Or even if that doesn't appeal to them, then yoga or whatever, that's appropriate. But for anyone who is willing to try at least a little to be self-attentive, then all these other means become unnecessary. Because even the little effort we make to be self-attentive is far more effective than great efforts made in any other path. Does that adequately answer this question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And what you said about taking God as something other than yourself,
yes,
or taking God as no different from yourself, that is also a belief. I mean, it's not an experience, of course, but there has to be a conviction there, or some clarity about that.
Yes. That is when our mind is going outwards, we take ourselves to be this this person, this body. So God is obviously, in a sense, something other than ourselves. That is, God isn't this little person we take ourselves to be. So inevitably we can never be truly separate from God, because God is the infinite whole. So nothing can be separate from what is infinite. Because if we were separate from God, God would thereby be limited. Everything would be God except for me. So we thereby limited God. So, but so long as we limit ourselves, God seems to be something other than ourselves. So for the outward going mind, to take God to be a name and form is appropriate. Bhagavan says in verse 4 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. He doesn't just say the world will be likewise, God will also be likewise. That is, so long as we take ourselves to be a form, formlessness is just an idea, and every idea is a form. So we can't truly take God to be formless, so long as because we then believe it, we then have a belief, God is formless. That belief is itself a form. So to know God as formless, we need to know ourselves as formless.
But so to know God as nothing other than yourself means to practice Atma-vichara and to go to the experience and to have a certain conviction, or even though intellectually you understand that Bhagavan says that you are God ultimately, as the ultimate reality and so on, and you practice Atma-vichara, and that develops I don't know if conviction is the right word or not.
It develops a clarity. And with clarity comes conviction.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just, okay, then I'm going to start meditating as if I were God. Okay, I was meditating a bit. Okay, I'm going to. No, it's not like just like that. I mean, there has to be a certain amount of practice. Yeah, a certain amount of practice, and I don't know, a sense that you are that.
Yeah. Yes.
Or take it in.
In order to investigate ourselves, we must have great love. So to the extent we are, to the extent that we are truly practicing self-investigation, the driving force behind that is love. That is, we can't, without love, we can't practice self-investigation. And of all the forms of devotion, this is the best form of devotion. That is because the natural inclination of the mind is to go outwards. It's very much easier for the mind to attend to God in name and form than to attend to oneself, because it's a natural inclination of the mind to go outwards. So the love that is required to attend to a name and form of God, still greater love is required to attend to ourselves. We may be lacking that love now, but at least we can cultivate it by at least trying little by little by little.
That was I was going to say, because I mean, I feel love. I mean, I practice and as much as I can now, but I still feel that big love. I mean, of course, and I know intellectually I know what Bhagavan says, that you are God, and we are that, and so on. I know that God cannot be anything other than what I am. Of course, I go within. I do what I can, some seconds, 1 minute, several minutes, whatever. But then I don't have that big love that.
But the very fact that we try shows at least we've got some love.
Yeah.
We can only work with the love we've got. So to the extent that we have love, to that extent we will be trying to be self-attentive. And by that, our love will certainly grow.
Yeah, one thing that caught my attention in one of your videos with someone else, I don't remember with whom, you were talking that you were saying that there is that if we are lucky, you said something of the sort. If we are lucky, Bhagavan won't give us, will not make us experience any other, to have any other experiences apart from this waking state or so, like any other higher states or whatever, because that would be another complication or another
distraction. That is
another
anything.
distraction. Exactly, and that it really hit me, because in spirituality, the measure of progress, many times, many often is done by the experiences you have. Like that is like, seems like you're in the right path in a way. Yeah, and when you said that, it was like, oh, so it's better not to have that.
Once some person who obviously didn't understand Bhagavan, that is what Bhagavan really was. Some person asked Bhagavan, Swami, if you were to see God, what would you ask for? He said, I would ask God to stop appearing, because I don't want a God who appears. If God appears, I think the question was, if God appeared before you, what would you ask for? I would ask him to stop appearing, because God, anything that appears will also disappear. But I don't want such a God. I want a God that is ever present.
Exactly. Yeah, but I mean, if we ask in the spiritual path, it's very common. So I mean, seeing God would be like, wow. You know?
That's why Bhagavan says in verse 20, I think, of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, leaving oneself. I mean, leaving oneself who sees, oneself seeing God is seeing a mental vision. That is, so long as we see God as something other than ourselves, it's only a mental vision. It's only something mental that we are seeing. And then he goes on to say, only one who sees oneself, the origin of oneself, is one who has seen God. Because the origin oneself going, that means because it's ego going, when ego goes, oneself is not other than God. So that's why I said earlier, we are on, if we are following Bhagavan's path, we should not allow ourselves to be distracted by any experience. Experiences may come. We may have sublime, wonderful experiences may present themselves. To whom do all these things appear? To me. We have to turn our attention back to ourselves. Our whole focus should be in investigating ourselves. So any experience is just a distraction. Our attention should be on, who am I, the experiencer? And to the extent we attend to the experiencer, to the subject, to one who sees all these things, to one to whom everything appears, to that extent will it subside. And when it subsides completely into its source, what will remain is what we actually are. That's why he says in the next verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if one asks what is the truth of many texts that say oneself seeing oneself or seeing God, he then gives an answer. Since oneself is one, how is oneself to see oneself? If it is not possible to see oneself, how to see God? That is, we can't see ourselves as an object, so how can we see God? The answer he gives is, becoming food is seeing. That is, it's only, we know what we actually are. We know what God is only when ego is swallowed. That is, when ego dissolves back into its source. That state of being that then remains, that is the true seeing.
Yeah, and going back to the question, when an aspirant says, because I think it's normal to think that when you have so little, your attention is so easily turned outwards. I mean, it can be easy to think that I'm not worthy enough. I cannot follow this path the way some other people can, or maybe my attention is too weak, and my mind is very impure, and I have to start with other paths.
Any sincere aspirant, anyone who's genuinely following this path, will feel the inadequacy of their own efforts, because none of us have sufficient love yet to be self-attentive. If we had sufficient love, then we would attend only to ourselves and we would be swallowed. So our love to attend to ourselves is inadequate for all of us, both for beginners and for those who are advanced. We will always feel our love to be inadequate. But the very fact that we take an interest in this path, the very fact we're interested in Bhagavan's teachings, means that there's at least the beginnings of some love there. So let us cultivate that love by trying little by little, as much as possible, to be self-attentive. Even if it's only for a few moments here and there, those few moments will go a long way to purifying the mind. Purifying the mind means weakening our inclination to go outwards and strengthening our love to go within.
So basically, solving out the mess there might be in some of our vrittis, like in our thoughts or something, it would be of no use in the path of Bhagavan.
No.
Cleaning up the mess, or the
only way to clear up the mess. That is, yesterday one lady who has who suffers from severe anxiety, she watched a video by some other well-known non-dual teacher, and apparently he said in some context, but when asked about anxiety, he said, merely attending, it's not good to try and attend to, if you try and attend only to consciousness, and you are trying to escape from your anxiety, you need to work through the anxiety, or you need to pay attention to the anxiety in order to find out the cause of it, or something. I don't know in detail what he said, but anyway, he said something, and she felt this wasn't right, but she asked me about it, and I said, no, according to Bhagavan, anxiety, like anything else, it thrives on our attention. The more we attend to something, the more we are feeding that thing, the more reality we're giving to that thing. So the most effective way to overcome anxiety is to turn your attention back to whom is this anxiety? Who am I who feel this anxiety? By turning your attention back to yourself, you are depriving the anxiety of the attention that it is demanding of you. And the less attention you give it, the more it will subside. And this is true of any problem we face. So what Bhagavan has taught us is such a powerful means to overcome any type of problem. But of course, we must be willing to follow this. If we're not willing, if we're not willing to follow this path of self, if we're not willing even to try to follow this path of self-attentiveness, then it's good to practice what the person who asked this question, what they refer to as bridging practices. If you've got no inclination to even try to be self-attentive, by all means practice bhakti, or if bhakti doesn't appeal to you, practice yoga, or meditation, or whatever. But if you have even the slightest inclination to try and be self-attentive, don't neglect that inclination. Cultivate that inclination. That liking.
Do you think if some person came to Bhagavan asking, oh, Bhagavan, but I have to understand my anxiety. It's primordial that I understand. He would say, okay, so just go and
he would say, to whom is this anxiety? To whom is this idea that you have to understand your anxiety?
Yeah, that would be actually feeding the anxiety.
You're feeding, anything is being fed.
Yeah.
That is the whole appearance of the world. The more we attend to it, the more real it seems to be. So if you're a scientist making research on the world, whatever you research, it becomes more and more real to you.
Yeah, right.
But it all disappears when you fall asleep. So how real is it? If it were really real, why doesn't it appear in your sleep? So that is the solution to all problems. That all problems, the root of all problems is ego. The solution to ego is this practice, simple practice of being self-attentive. This is the most effective means to overcome all kinds of problems.
Yeah, it's the only solution to all the problems. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Not everyone will be willing to accept this, so then it's appropriate for them to follow other paths or do whatever seems to them to be right.
Yeah, because in a way, following Bhagavan's path is because if you feel anxious, for example, you have a hard problem with anxiety or something which is very, very severe, which is I understand that Bhagavan doesn't give you a method to remove your anxiety. I mean, it's
no, Bhagavan has given us the perfect method.
I mean, to remove the anxiety without removing yourself. I mean, that's what I mean.
Yes.
As ego.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
Yeah. So
this is the price to be paid in Bhagavan's path. You have to be ready to give up yourself.
Leave it all to give up, exactly. Yeah. So
I want to remain without all my problems. That I that wants to remain without the problems is itself the root of all problems. So long as that I is there will inevitably be problems. So the way to give up all problems is to give up the I who has the problems. What is that I? That is ego. If you investigate it, it subsides and disappears. It dissolves back into its source. So what Bhagavan has given us is the perfect medicine for all problems. But we must be willing to take the medicine. If we're not willing to take this medicine, then we can try other palliatives, which may help to some extent. But ultimately, we have to come to this path if we really want to cure the disease.
Yeah. It is the best vaccine. So to adapt it to modern times.
Yes, because the disease is ego. And the nature of ego is a false awareness of ourselves. So the only way to eradicate it is to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. The only way to be aware of ourselves as we actually are is to investigate ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether we're in the highest heaven or the worst hell, to whom does this appear? To me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the message.
Yep. So who is this me?